The crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow across the pristine dining room, but the light couldn't soften what was about to unfold. Isabella Morgan's voice cut through the elegant atmosphere like shattered glass. "Get out of my restaurant, you filthy piece of garbage." Her perfectly manicured hand grabbed the elderly homeless man by his worn collar, shoving him toward the gleaming doors. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with each aggressive step. "People like you make me sick. You actually thought you could walk in here reeking like a dumpster and sit at our tables? This is a place for real customers, not street trash begging for handouts." The old man stumbled, his weathered face crumbling. Every head in the restaurant turned. Every fork paused midair. Every conversation died. They all watched his humiliation unfold like a tragedy no one could stop. And there, tucked away in the corner booth, a man in a faded hoodie and baseball cap slowly lowered his coffee cup. Those famous brown eyes darkened with a fury that would soon change everything. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. The autumn evening had wrapped Beverly Hills in velvet darkness, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Along the pristine sidewalks, luxury cars glided past designer windows that glittered like treasure boxes. Walking among them was a solitary figure who moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere particular to be. Alex Winters had always preferred walking to being driven. There was something about putting one foot in front of the other that cleared his mind. Something that reminded him he was still just a person moving through the world like anyone else. Tonight, like so many nights before, he'd slipped away from the crushing weight of his celebrity life. He'd escaped into blessed anonymity. His disguise, if you could even call it that, was simply his natural state. A worn gray hoodie with a small tear near the left pocket. Faded jeans that had seen better days. Scuffed boots that had walked countless miles across countless cities. A baseball cap pulled low over eyes that had seen tremendous success and devastating loss. 3 days of stubble that softened his famous jawline just enough to make recognition unlikely. This was how Alex preferred to exist when the cameras stopped rolling. Not as a Hollywood legend worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but as a man who understood that money and fame were temporary illusions. In a world where everyone eventually returned to dust, what really mattered was how you treated people along the way. He'd been walking for nearly an hour when his stomach reminded him that even philosophical wanderers needed food. Looking up at the building before him, Alex felt a flicker of recognition. The Silver Spoon, one of the restaurants in the chain he'd quietly acquired 6 months ago as part of a larger investment portfolio. He never actually visited this location. The purchase had been handled entirely by his business managers. Strategic acquisition, they'd called it. Good on paper, steady returns. He'd signed the documents without much thought, trusting his team while he focused on film projects and his motorcycle business. Now, standing before the elegant facade with warm light spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, curiosity stirred within him. What kind of establishment bore his name on the ownership papers? What kind of people worked within those walls? The hostess station was occupied by a young woman whose smile faltered the moment she took in his disheveled appearance. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her eyes performed that rapid calculation Alex had witnessed countless times before. The mental arithmetic of worthiness. The silent judgment that determined whether a person deserved courtesy or contempt. "Good evening," Jennifer said, her voice cooling several degrees as she noted his muddy boots leaving faint prints on the polished floor. "Do you have a reservation?" "Just looking for a quiet table," Alex replied, deliberately roughening his voice slightly. "Corner booth if you have one available." Jennifer hesitated. You could see the debate playing out behind her eyes, whether to suggest he might be more comfortable elsewhere. But the restaurant's policy was explicit. A framed sign behind her declared, "All are welcome here." She couldn't refuse service without cause. "Right this way," she said with professional detachment, leading him to a small booth tucked in the far corner, where he'd be least visible to the other patrons enjoying their expensive meals. Alex settled into the leather seat and surveyed his surroundings with practiced subtlety. The dining room was about three-quarters full. Business executives in tailored suits conducting dinner meetings. Wealthy couples celebrating anniversaries over bottles of wine that cost more than most people earned in a week. Tables of entertainment industry professionals discussing projects with the casual confidence of people accustomed to success. The decor was elegant without being ostentatious. Cream-colored walls adorned with tasteful artwork. Crystal chandeliers casting warm pools of light across white tablecloths. Fresh flowers on every table, their subtle fragrance mingling with the aroma of expertly prepared cuisine. Everything looked perfect on the surface, yet something felt wrong in a way Alex couldn't immediately identify. A server approached his table, a young woman with tired eyes that contradicted her professional smile. Her name tag identified her as Carmen, and the slight tremor in her hands as she placed the menu before him spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than a long shift. "Good evening, sir. May I start you with something to drink? Coffee, please. Black. Of course. I'll return shortly to take your order." As Carmen departed, Alex noticed her glance toward the front of the restaurant, where a woman in an immaculate black dress stood surveying the dining room like a general inspecting her troops. This had to be the manager, and something about her bearing set every instinct in Alex's mind on high alert. Isabella Morgan carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed appearance was everything. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun that seemed designed to eliminate any hint of softness from her features. Her makeup was flawless in a way that looked more like armor than enhancement, and her eyes, gray and cold as winter steel, scanned the restaurant with calculating precision. When her gaze passed over Alex's corner booth, he caught a flicker of displeasure cross her features. His presence clearly offended her sense of what belonged in her carefully curated establishment. But she didn't approach, apparently deciding that one scruffy customer in a distant corner wasn't worth the effort of confrontation. Alex ordered a simple meal and settled in to observe. There was something happening beneath the surface of this restaurant. Something that explained the weariness in Carmen's eyes. The tension that seemed to radiate from every staff member whenever Isabella passed nearby. The hours slipped past. Alex nursed his coffee and watched the intricate dance of service unfold before him. He noticed how servers flinched when Isabella approached. He observed the way conversations died whenever she entered earshot. He cataloged the small cruelties she dispensed with casual efficiency. A cutting remark here, a dismissive gesture there, a look of contempt that could wither flowers. But what happened next would transform a simple dinner observation into something far more significant. The front door opened. An elderly man entered, immediately drawing the attention of every person in the dining room. He was perhaps 70 years old, with a shock of white hair that still showed traces of the brown it must have been decades ago. His clothes were clean, but clearly secondhand. A worn jacket that had been carefully mended. Trousers that showed the faded evidence of multiple washings. Shoes that had been polished despite their obvious age. He'd clearly made an effort to present himself well. His beard was neatly trimmed, his hair combed back with what appeared to be water rather than product. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. The bearing of someone who had once occupied spaces far different from the streets he now called home. In his weathered hand, he clutched a single bill. $100. Wrinkled and worn, but unmistakably real. The homeless man approached the hostess station with the hesitant hope of someone expecting rejection, but praying for mercy. Jennifer's face immediately contorted into an expression of disgust. She took an involuntary step backward, as if proximity to poverty might be contagious. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice soft and surprisingly cultured. "I would like a table, please. Specifically, table 7 by the window, if it's available." Before Jennifer could respond, Isabella Morgan materialized beside her with supernatural speed. Like her radar for undesirables had been finely tuned over years of practice. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of thinly veiled contempt. "We're fully booked this evening." Alex could see clearly from his vantage point that at least 4 tables sat empty, their pristine settings awaiting customers who hadn't yet arrived. "I see empty tables," the man observed quietly, not accusingly, simply stating a fact visible to anyone with eyes. "Those are reserved for actual customers," Isabella replied, her smile never reaching her Arctic eyes. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the establishments down the street. There's a soup kitchen 3 blocks east that serves people of your circumstances." The man's face fell, but he didn't retreat. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "I have money. I can pay for my meal. I just want to sit at table 7. It's important to me." "Important?" Isabella's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "What could possibly be important about a homeless person sitting in my restaurant, stinking up the furniture and driving away legitimate customers?" Several diners had begun watching the confrontation, expressions ranging from uncomfortable sympathy to entertained amusement. A few looked away, unwilling to witness humiliation they felt powerless to prevent. 35 years ago, the man said quietly, his voice shaking now, "I proposed to my wife at that table. She said yes. We ate our first meal as an engaged couple looking out that window. She passed away 4 years ago, and I just wanted to have one more dinner with her, in the place where everything began." His voice broke on the final words. Tears began to gather in eyes that had clearly shed many tears before. Isabella Morgan showed not a single flicker of compassion. "How touching," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "A romantic tale from a man who probably stole that $100 bill from some honest person's pocket. Let me make something perfectly clear. This restaurant serves a certain caliber of clientele. You are not that caliber. You never were, and you never will be. Now remove yourself from my establishment before I have security escort you out like the garbage you clearly are." The man stood frozen, humiliation burning across his weathered features. Around him, the dining room had fallen completely silent. Every fork suspended, every conversation halted, witnesses processing the cruelty unfolding before their eyes. "Please," he whispered one last time, and you could hear his heart breaking in that single word. "My name is Thomas Mitchell. I used to be a professor here in Los Angeles. Literature and creative writing. I've fallen on difficult times, but I'm still a human being. I still have feelings. I still have memories worth honoring." Isabella's response was to grab Thomas Mitchell by the collar of his carefully mended jacket and physically shove him toward the door. What happens next will leave you speechless. A mysterious stranger in that corner booth is about to reveal himself, and when he does, Isabella's entire world will come crashing down. Stay with me. Isabella's perfectly manicured nails dug into the worn fabric of Thomas's jacket as she shoved him harder. "Get out of my restaurant, you disgusting piece of garbage. People like you make me sick. You think you can just walk in here smelling like a dumpster and sit at our tables? This is a place for real customers, not street trash begging for scraps." Thomas stumbled, catching himself against the door frame. His hands shook as he tried to maintain his balance. Isabella continued her assault, her voice rising with each word. "And don't even think about coming back. If I see your face within 100 feet of this building, I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Now get out. Get out before I lose what little patience I've left." She punctuated her final words by shoving Thomas through the door with enough force to send him sprawling onto the sidewalk outside. The glass door swung shut behind him with a sound like a judge's gavel, sealing the cold night air on one side and the warm judgment of privilege on the other. Isabella straightened her dress, smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her sleeve, turned to address the stunned dining room with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I apologize for that unpleasant interruption," she announced brightly, as if nothing of consequence had occurred. "Rest assured that the comfort and safety of our valued guests is always our highest priority. Please, enjoy the remainder of your evening." She strode back to her position near the hostess stand, apparently satisfied that order had been restored to her carefully controlled domain. What Isabella Morgan didn't know, couldn't possibly have suspected, was that the man in the corner booth had watched every second of the confrontation with eyes that missed nothing. She didn't know that the scruffy customer she'd mentally dismissed as barely worthy of service was the actual owner of the restaurant, where she just committed such casual cruelty. She didn't know that Alex Winters had just witnessed the destruction of a human being's dignity. And she had no idea that he had absolutely no intention of letting such behavior go unanswered. But before he acted, Alex needed to understand. He needed to know the full truth of what was happening within these walls. Not just the obvious cruelty he'd witnessed, but whatever darkness lurked beneath the surface. Rising from his booth, Alex approached the front door. Through the glass, he could see Thomas Mitchell slowly picking himself up from the sidewalk, brushing dirt from clothes that represented his best effort at appearing respectable. The old man didn't cry, didn't rage against the injustice. He simply gathered the shreds of his dignity and began walking away into the night, shoulders bowed under a weight that went far beyond physical exhaustion. Alex pushed through the door and followed. He found Thomas Mitchell sitting on a bench in a small park 3 blocks from the restaurant. The homeless man was staring at the $100 bill in his hands, turning it over and over, as if trying to understand how something that should have bought him one precious hour of memory had instead purchased only humiliation. "May I sit with you?" Alex asked quietly. Thomas looked up. His eyes were red but dry. He studied the stranger before him, and whatever he saw apparently passed muster because he nodded. Shifted slightly to make room on the bench. "You were in the restaurant," Thomas said. "It wasn't a question." "I was." "Then you saw what happened." "I did." Thomas returned his gaze to the bill in his hands, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 1,000 losses. 35 years ago, I was a professor at UCLA, published 3 books, had a wife who loved me, a home in Pasadena, a life that made sense. He paused, collecting memories like fallen leaves. Eleanor was her name. My Ellie. We met in a bookstore. Can you believe that? I was reaching for a copy of Hemingway, and she was reaching for the same one. Our hands touched, and I knew. I just knew she was the one I'd been waiting for my whole life. Alex listened in silence, understanding that some stories needed to be told without interruption. "I proposed to her at that restaurant," Thomas continued, and you could hear the love still alive in his voice after all these years. "It was called something different back then, but the building is the same. Table 7, right by the window where you could watch the sunset paint the sky. She cried when I asked her, said yes before I even finished the question." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "We went back every anniversary for 31 years. Same table, same wine, same look in her eyes that made me feel like the luckiest man alive." "What happened?" Alex asked softly. "Cancer." The word fell like a stone into still water. "Ovarian cancer, stage 4. By the time they found it." Thomas's voice broke. He took a shuddering breath. "The medical bills devoured everything. The house, the savings, my retirement fund. I sold it all willingly, gladly, because what is money compared to more time with the woman you love?" Thomas's voice grew rough with remembered grief that seemed fresh as an open wound. "She died in my arms on a Tuesday afternoon, just slipped away while I was reading her favorite poem. And after she was gone, the bills kept coming. I couldn't teach anymore, couldn't concentrate, couldn't remember why any of it mattered. Lost my position at the university. Lost the apartment I'd rented after selling the house. Lost everything except the memories, and those I guard like treasure." "How long have you been on the streets?" Alex asked gently. 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. Thomas looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and his eyes reflected their distant light. "I found that $100 bill this morning, lying in the gutter like it was waiting for me, and I thought, maybe this is a sign. Maybe Ellie sent it so I could have one more dinner with her. At our table, in our place." He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness sharp enough to draw blood. "I spent hours getting ready, washed my clothes in a public restroom sink, shaved with a razor I found in a shelter donation box, combed my hair until it looked almost respectable. I thought if I tried hard enough, if I looked presentable enough, they might let me in. Might let me pretend just for an hour, that I was still the man I used to be. Thomas finally looked directly at Alex, and in his eyes was not anger but a profound, aching sadness that seemed to have no bottom. The funny thing is, that woman was right. I am garbage now. I'm exactly what she said I was. A homeless piece of trash with no place in a world of linen tablecloths and crystal chandeliers. Eleanor would be ashamed of what I've become. No, Alex said firmly, and his voice carried an authority that made Thomas pause. She wouldn't. How would you know? Because anyone who loved you the way you describe would never be ashamed of you for falling down. She would only be proud if you got back up. Thomas studied the stranger beside him with new curiosity, really seeing him for the first time. Who are you? Why did you follow me? Alex considered how to answer. He wasn't ready to reveal his identity. Not yet. Not until he understood more about what was happening at that restaurant. I'm someone who believes that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we really are, Alex said finally. And I believe that what happened to you tonight was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. It doesn't matter, Thomas said wearily, and you could hear decades of defeat in those 3 words. Nothing will change. People like her have all the power. People like me have none. That's just how the world works. Maybe, Alex replied. Or maybe the world only works that way because not enough people are willing to challenge it. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. Not his own. He never carried those. But one for a shelter he'd quietly funded for years through anonymous donations. Go to this address, he said, pressing the card into Thomas's hand with gentle insistence. Tell them a friend sent you. They'll give you a bed, a hot meal, and whatever help you need. No questions asked. No judgment given. Thomas looked at the card, then back at the stranger who had offered it. Why are you helping me? Because everyone deserves at least one person who believes they matter, Alex said simply. And because I have a feeling your story isn't over yet, Thomas Mitchell. Not even close. He stood to leave, then paused. I'll find you again, Alex promised, and there was steel beneath the kindness in his voice. When I do, I hope to have better news about the woman who hurt you tonight. But first, I need to understand why she is the way she is. I've learned that people who cause pain are usually carrying more of it than anyone can see. Thomas watched the stranger disappear into the night, clutching the business card like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. He didn't know who his benefactor was, couldn't possibly have guessed the truth. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thomas Mitchell felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Over the next 3 days, Alex returned to the Silver Spoon, and what he discovered would reveal a web of theft and cruelty far worse than anyone could have imagined. The truth about Isabella Morgan is about to come to light, and it will change everything. Alex returned to the Silver Spoon the following evening, and the evening after that, and the evening after that. Each night, he occupied the same corner booth, ordered the same simple meal, and watched the operation of his restaurant with the careful attention of someone cataloging evidence for a case he hadn't yet fully defined. What he discovered over those 72 hours was far worse than a single act of cruelty toward a homeless man. Isabella Morgan was running a systematic operation of theft and exploitation that would have impressed a seasoned criminal. It began with the tip system. Alex noticed that servers like Carmen deposited their cash tips into a communal jar at the end of each shift, trusting Isabella to divide the proceeds fairly among the staff. What the servers couldn't know without access to the financial records, was that Isabella was skimming 30% of every dollar before distribution. On his second night, Alex deliberately overtipped Carmen by $100 on a $30 meal. He watched the young server's eyes widen with surprised gratitude as she processed the generosity. But the next day, when he struck up a casual conversation with her during a quiet moment, Carmen mentioned something that made his blood run cold. Strange, she said with forced cheer that didn't quite mask her disappointment. I thought we had some generous tables last night, but my share was less than usual. Isabella says it was a slow night for tipping. Alex said nothing, but he made a mental note to investigate further. The tip theft was only the beginning. Through careful observation and strategic conversations with various staff members, Alex pieced together a picture of systematic financial abuse that extended throughout the operation. Isabella was kiting invoices, submitting receipts for supplies that were never purchased, and pocketing the difference. She was falsifying employee time cards, recording fewer hours than were actually worked, and keeping the payroll savings. She was accepting kickbacks from vendors in exchange for exclusive contracts, regardless of whether their products were the best value for the restaurant. The total amount she had stolen over 3 years, based on Alex's rough calculations and later confirmed by forensic accountants, exceeded $127,000. But knowing what Isabella was doing wasn't enough. Alex needed to understand why. The answer came from an unexpected source. On his third evening at the restaurant, Alex noticed Isabella step outside to take a phone call. Her usually composed demeanor cracked as she listened to whoever was on the other end. And for a brief moment, her face showed something that looked almost like fear. Alex followed at a discreet distance, positioning himself near an open window where he could hear fragments of the conversation. "I'm doing everything I can," Isabella said, her voice tight with desperation that seemed to strangle each word. "I just need more time." A pause as she listened to someone on the other end. "Please, you have to understand. He's my son. I'll get you the money, I swear. Just don't hurt him when he gets out. He's all I have left." Another pause, and you could hear her breathing getting faster. "More shallow. 6 months. That's when he's released. I'll have all 85,000 by then. I promise. Please, please." The call ended. Isabella stood alone in the alley behind the restaurant, and her carefully maintained composure finally shattered like glass dropped on concrete. Alex watched as this woman who had seemed so cold, so cruel, so utterly without compassion, pressed her back against the brick wall and slid down until she was sitting on the dirty ground. And then Isabella Morgan, the tyrant of the silver spoon, began to cry. These weren't delicate tears, not the refined weeping of someone performing emotion for an audience. These were gut-wrenching sobs of a mother facing the possible murder of her child. The desperate gasping of someone who had run out of legitimate options and was drowning in choices that violated everything she had once believed about right and wrong. Alex didn't approach. Not yet. He needed more information before he could determine how to proceed. Over the following days, he hired a private investigator to look into Isabella Morgan's background. The report that came back painted a picture far more complex than the simple villain he had initially assumed her to be. Isabella had been born into poverty, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She had clawed her way up through sheer determination, putting herself through college while working full-time, eventually landing a management position at the Silver Spoon through a combination of competence and relentless ambition. She had married young, divorced younger when her husband abandoned her with a 3-year-old son named Marcus. For the next 2 decades, Isabella had raised Marcus alone, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities she had never enjoyed. Marcus had been a good kid, smart and kind, with a future that seemed limitless. He'd earned a scholarship to USC, where he planned to study business and eventually take over management of the restaurant where his mother had built her career. Then everything fell apart. In his sophomore year, Marcus fell in with a crowd that introduced him to gambling and drugs. What started as occasional recreation quickly spiraled into addiction. He began borrowing money to feed his habits, first from friends, then from legitimate lenders, and finally from people who charged interest in blood when payments were missed. By the time Isabella discovered the extent of her son's problems, Marcus owed $85,000 to men who communicated their collection policies through broken bones and threatening photographs. Marcus had tried to solve the problem himself, robbing a convenience store in a desperate attempt to pay off his debts. He'd been caught, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility, where he was currently serving his time. But the debt remained. The men Marcus owed didn't care that he was incarcerated. They had made it crystal clear to Isabella that the money would be collected one way or another. If she failed to pay by the time Marcus was released, they would take their payment from her son in a currency far more permanent than cash. Isabella Morgan wasn't a monster. She was a mother who had exhausted every legal option and turned to theft as the only remaining way to save her child's life. This didn't excuse what she had done. The servers she had robbed were also struggling. Also try to support families and pay bills and survive in a world that seemed designed to keep the working class perpetually on the edge of disaster. Carmen Santos, the server with tired eyes, was a single mother whose daughter Sophie depended on tip income for childcare payments. David Chun, the veteran server with PTSD, was saving every penny to open his own business and escape the cycle of working for others. Rachel Brooks, the young server recently hired, was a college student whose tuition payments were falling behind because her expected income never quite materialized. Isabella's desperation had created a cascade of smaller desperations. Each person she stole from facing their own impossible choices as a result of her crimes. But understanding the why behind her actions gave Alex options he wouldn't have had otherwise. He could pursue punishment, which would satisfy the demands of justice but solve nothing. Or he could pursue something far more difficult and potentially more transformative. He could pursue redemption. On the fourth day, Alex made his move. He arrived at the Silver Spoon during the afternoon lull, when the restaurant was nearly empty and the staff was preparing for the evening rush. He had traded his usual disguise for something slightly more presentable, though still far from the polished appearance one might expect from a man of his wealth and status. Isabella noticed him immediately, frowning at his repeated presence in her establishment. She approached his table with barely concealed irritation. "You've been here every day this week," she observed coldly, her arms crossed defensively. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Alex looked up at her with eyes that had witnessed her cruelty, her breakdown in the alley, and everything in between. "Actually, yes," he said calmly. "I'm looking for answers about why you've been stealing from your employees for the past 3 years. Isabella's face went white, completely drained of color in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, but her voice trembled in a way that betrayed the lie. "I think you do." Alex gestured to the seat across from him. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss, and I'd prefer to do it without an audience." Isabella remained standing, her eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating the odds of successful escape. "Who are you?" she demanded, and there was fear now, raw and undisguised. "Some kind of investigator? Did the staff hire you to spy on me?" Alex reached into his pocket and withdrew a single document, which he placed on the table between them with deliberate care. "My name is Alex Winters," he said quietly, and watched her world begin to crumble. "And 6 months ago, I became the owner of this restaurant." Isabella's entire world just came crashing down. But what Alex does next will shock you even more. Because sometimes the greatest acts of justice don't come from punishment, they come from understanding. Stay with me to see how one decision changes multiple lives forever. The color drained completely from Isabella's face. She swayed slightly, reaching for the back of a nearby chair to steady herself before her legs gave out completely. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The acquisition was anonymous. Nobody knows who the new owner is." "I prefer it that way," Alex acknowledged, his tone neither harsh nor kind. "Simply factual. It allows me to see how my businesses actually operate when people don't know they're being watched." Isabella sank into the chair across from him. Her earlier arrogance completely evaporated like morning mist under harsh sunlight. "How much do you know?" she asked, and you could hear the resignation in every syllable. "Everything," Alex said, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. "I know about the tips you've been skimming, the invoices you've been faking, the time cards you've been falsifying. I know exactly how much you've stolen and from whom." Isabella closed her eyes, accepting the death of her carefully constructed deceptions. "But I also know why," Alex continued, and his voice softened just slightly. "I know about Marcus. I know about the debt. I know about the men who will kill him if you don't pay." Isabella's eyes snapped open, filling with tears she could no longer contain. "Then you understand," she pleaded, leaning forward with desperate intensity. "You understand that I didn't have a choice. I'm his mother. I couldn't just let him die." "There's always a choice," Alex replied, not unkindly. "You chose to save your son by making the lives of others harder. Carmen has a daughter too. David has dreams he's trying to build. Rachel has tuition she can't pay. When you stole from them, you passed your burden onto their shoulders. I know, Isabella said, and now she was weeping openly, mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. I know what I did was wrong. I've known it every single day. But when I looked at the alternatives, when I imagined Marcus beaten to death in some alley because I failed to protect him, I couldn't see another way. What about asking for help? Isabella laughed bitterly through her tears, and the sound was broken glass scraping against concrete. From whom? The police can't protect him from these people. Banks won't lend to someone already drowning in debt. Friends, she shook her head. I don't have any left. When your life becomes about survival, relationships are the first casualty. Alex studied her for a long moment, weighing her words against her actions, her desperation against the damage she had caused. There's something else I know about you, Isabella, he said finally. Something that your personnel file and your bank records don't show. What's that? I know about the homeless man you threw out of this restaurant 4 nights ago. I know you called him garbage and trash and worse. I know you destroyed whatever remained of his dignity and sent him into the night like he was worthless. Isabella's face twisted with a pain that seemed to go beyond the immediate crisis. I know, she whispered, and her voice broke on the words. I know what I did to him, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. Why? Alex pressed, leaning forward. Why treat him that way? He had money. He was willing to pay. He only wanted to honor his dead wife's memory. Isabella was silent for a long moment, struggling to articulate something she had perhaps never admitted even to herself. Because he reminded me of what I'm becoming, she finally said, and the honesty in her voice was raw and painful. When I looked at him, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my future. One day, when all of this falls apart, when I'm caught or when Marcus's creditors decide I'm not paying fast enough, I'll be exactly where he is. Homeless, worthless, begging for scraps from people who see me as less than human. She looked at Alex with eyes stripped of all pretense, all masks finally removed. I wasn't cruel to him because I thought I was better than him. I was cruel because I know I'm not. And that terrified me more than anything. The silence stretched between them, heavy with confession and consequence. What happens now? Isabella asked quietly, and you could hear her bracing for the end. Do you call the police? Do I go to prison while my son gets murdered by loan sharks? Alex considered his options carefully. He had the evidence to destroy Isabella Morgan utterly. A few phone calls would end her career, her freedom, and quite possibly her life. But destruction was easy. Anyone could destroy. The real question was whether something could be built from the rubble. I'm going to make you an offer, Alex said finally. One time only. If you refuse, or if you accept and then fail to honor the terms, the consequences will be severe and permanent. Do you understand? Isabella nodded, barely daring to breathe. First, you will repay every penny you've stolen. Not immediately. I understand you don't have the money. But over time, through honest work and reasonable payment plans, every server, every vendor, every person you've cheated will receive full restitution. I will. Isabella agreed instantly. However long it takes, I'll pay it all back. Second, you will step down from your management position. Not because you're fired, but because you're being reassigned. I have a training program I'm developing for employees who've made mistakes but deserve second chances. You'll be its first graduate and eventually its first instructor. Isabella blinked in surprise, and something that might have been hope flickered in her eyes. You wanted to teach people? After everything I've done, who better to help others avoid your mistakes than someone who's made them all? Alex replied, Your experience has value, Isabella. The question is whether you'll use it to help others or to hurt them. I'll help, Isabella said firmly, and the conviction in her voice was steel. I swear I'll help. Third, and this is not negotiable, you will find Thomas Mitchell, the man you threw out of this restaurant, and you will apologize to him. Not a formal corporate apology written by lawyers. A real apology from your heart, acknowledging exactly what you did and why it was wrong. Isabella's face crumpled, and fresh tears began to fall. After what I said to him, he'll never accept my apology. Maybe not, Alex acknowledged. That's his choice, not yours. Your obligation is to offer it sincerely, regardless of how it's received. And the fourth thing? Isabella asked, sensing there was more. The fourth thing is about Marcus. Isabella tensed, fear flooding back into her features like a tide. She couldn't hold back. I have contacts, Alex said carefully, who can handle situations like your son's death. People who operate in spaces where law enforcement can't reach. I'll make some calls. By the end of the week, the men threatening Marcus will receive a very clear message that collecting on that debt would be extremely inadvisable. Isabella stared at him in disbelief. You can do that? You can make them leave him alone. I can make it very expensive for them to pursue the matter further, Alex replied. That's usually enough. These organizations are businesses at their core. When a debt becomes more trouble than it's worth, they write it off and move on. But why would you do this for me? Isabella demanded, and confusion mixed with gratitude in her voice. After everything I've done, why would you help me? Alex thought about the question carefully before answering. Because I've learned that broken people usually break others, he said finally. And the only way to stop that cycle is for someone to choose healing over punishment. You're not a monster, Isabella. You're a mother who ran out of options and made terrible choices. If I destroy you, nothing changes. The servers still struggle. Thomas still hurts. Marcus still faces danger. But if I help you become someone different, maybe something good can grow from all this pain. He leaned forward, holding her gaze with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding. But understand this clearly. If you betray this chance, if you go back to stealing or treating people like garbage, I will know. And I will not offer mercy a second time. Isabella nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I understand. I won't waste this. I swear I won't waste this. Alex stood, dropping enough cash on the table to cover his meal and a generous tip. Find Thomas Mitchell, he said as he turned to leave. Start with the shelter at this address. He handed her a card. The same shelter where he'd sent Thomas 4 nights ago. And Isabella, when you apologize to him, mean it. He'll know if you don't. What happens when Isabella faces the man whose dignity she destroyed? Can a sincere apology heal wounds that deep? And what will Thomas do when the woman who called him garbage asks for his forgiveness? The final chapter of this story will restore your faith in humanity. The following Sunday, Isabella Morgan stood outside the doors of Haven's Rest Shelter, clutching a small paper bag like it contained the answer to every question she'd ever asked. Inside that bag was a meal from the Silver Spoon. Beef Wellington, perfectly prepared, wrapped carefully to maintain its warmth. A bottle of wine from the same vintage she'd seen Thomas request before she threw him out. And a handwritten note that had taken her 7 attempts to compose. Her hand shook as she reached for the door. The shelter volunteer who answered her knock was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile. You must be Isabella, the woman said. Alex mentioned you might be coming. Alex. Isabella hadn't expected the mysterious benefactor to be involved with this place directly. Founded this shelter 15 years ago, the volunteer explained, her voice warm with affection. Funds it almost entirely himself. Visits whenever he's in town, which is more often than most people realize. He told us to expect you and to help you find Mr. Mitchell when you arrived. She led Isabella through the facility, past rows of clean beds and common areas where residents gathered for conversation and community. The shelter was nothing like Isabella had imagined. It was bright and clean and filled with an atmosphere of genuine care that seemed to permeate every surface. Thomas Mitchell was sitting in a small garden at the back of the building, reading a worn paperback that looked like it had been through many hands before reaching his. He looked better than when Isabella had last seen him. Healthier, more rested. But when he looked up and recognized her, his face immediately closed like a door slamming shut. What are you doing here? Thomas demanded, rising to his feet with fists clenched at his sides. Isabella deserved his anger. She knew that, but the intensity of it still made her flinch. I came to apologize, she said quietly, and her voice shook with every word. I know that probably means nothing to you after what I did, but I need to say it anyway. Apologize? Thomas's laugh was harsh and humorless, scraping like sandpaper against her heart. You call me garbage. You call me trash. You threw me out of a restaurant where I proposed to my wife because you decided I wasn't worthy of basic human decency. And now you want to apologize? Yes, Isabella said, and she didn't defend herself, didn't make excuses, simply accepted his fury as her due. Why should I listen to anything you have to say? You shouldn't, Isabella replied, and tears began to stream down her face. You have every right to tell me to leave and never come back. But before you do, I need you to know something. She set the paper bag on the bench beside him with trembling hands. That night when I looked at you, I didn't see a stranger. I saw myself. I saw what I'm becoming, what I will be when everything falls apart. And instead of feeling compassion for someone sharing my fate, I felt fear. So I tried to destroy you, as if somehow hurting you would make my own future less terrifying. Thomas said nothing, but some of the rigid anger in his posture began to soften. I've been stealing from my employees for 3 years, Isabella continued, and the confession poured out like poison from a wound that needed lancing. Skimming their tips, faking invoices, cheating everyone who trusted me. I told myself it was necessary, that I had no choice because my son is in trouble and I needed the money to save his life. But the truth is, I had choices. I just chose to make other people suffer instead of finding a better way. She looked at Thomas with eyes stripped of all pretense. The man who owns that restaurant, he caught me. He knows everything I've done. And instead of destroying me, which I deserved, he offered me a chance to become someone different. Part of that chance was coming here to face you. Why would he do that? Thomas asked quietly, and his voice had lost some of its edge. Why would anyone offer mercy to someone who's caused so much harm? He said that broken people usually break others, and the only way to stop the cycle is for someone to choose healing over punishment. Isabella wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mr. Mitchell. What I did to you is unforgivable, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Not because I was caught, but because I finally understand how much pain I caused someone who was already carrying more than anyone should have to bear. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of old wounds and new possibilities. Finally, Thomas reached for the paper bag and looked inside. His breath caught when he saw the familiar meal. The same dish he had hoped to order on the night his dignity was stripped away. Beef Wellington, he said softly, and his voice cracked on the words. Eleanor's favorite. I remember what you said about proposing to her at table 7, Isabella explained, her voice barely above a whisper. I know this doesn't make up for anything. I know a meal is nothing compared to what I took from you. But I thought maybe you could still have that dinner with her, even if it's not in the place where it began. Thomas stared at the food for a long moment. Then slowly, he looked up at Isabella with eyes that had witnessed too much cruelty to be easily moved, but too much love to be entirely closed. Sit down, he said finally. Isabella blinked in surprise. What? I said sit down. Thomas gestured to the bench beside him. If you brought enough for 2, you might as well stay and eat. I didn't bring enough for 2, Isabella admitted. Then you can share mine. A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's weathered features, and it was like watching sunrise after the longest night. Eleanor always said the best meals were the ones shared with others, even others who didn't deserve it. Isabella sat, hardly daring to believe what was happening. I'm not saying I forgive you, Thomas clarified as he began unpacking the meal with careful hands. What you did was cruel and unnecessary and wrong. But Ellie also taught me that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I've been drinking that poison for 4 years, ever since she passed. I think it's time to put down the cup. He divided the beef Wellington carefully, giving Isabella the larger portion despite her protests. Tell me about your son, Thomas said as they began to eat. The one you were trying to save. And so, as the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the shelter garden, 2 broken people began the slow work of finding connection across the chasm of their shared pain. Isabella told Thomas about Marcus, about his promise and his fall, about the debts and the threats and the terror of watching her child slip away. Thomas told Isabella about Eleanor, about their 35 years of love, about the cancer that stole her body and the grief that had nearly stolen his will to live. They didn't become friends that day. The wounds were too fresh, the history too painful. But they planted seeds that would eventually grow into something unexpected and transformative. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Marcus Morgan was released from juvenile detention into a world that had changed dramatically during his absence. The men who had once threatened his life had received a very persuasive message from associates of Alex Winters, and they had decided that pursuing the debt was no longer worth the complications. Marcus walked out of that facility with a clean slate, a second chance, and a job waiting for him at one of Alex's restaurants. His mother had told him everything: the stealing, the lies, the destruction of an innocent man's dignity. Marcus had listened in silence, and when she finished, he had held her as she cried. "We both messed up pretty bad, Mom," he had said, and his voice was gentle. "I guess we better start figuring out how to mess up less." Marcus worked in the kitchen, starting as a dishwasher and working his way up through sheer determination. His supervisor was a tough but fair woman named Sarah who didn't care about his past, only about his present effort and his future potential. Within 6 months, he had earned a promotion to prep cook. Within a year, he would be sous chef. But more important than his professional success was his personal transformation. Marcus attended recovery meetings 3 times a week. He volunteered at homeless shelters on his days off, serving meals to people who reminded him how easily life could fall apart. He called his mother every night, not because she demanded it, but because he had learned the hard way that the people who love us need to hear our voices. Isabella Morgan had become someone barely recognizable from the woman who had once ruled the silver spoon through fear and manipulation. She ran the second chance program that Alex had envisioned, working with employees who had made mistakes but deserved opportunities to grow. She taught them what she had learned through failure: how desperation could corrupt good intentions, how easy it was to become the villain of someone else's story without even realizing it. Every month, she made payments toward the debt she owed to the servers and vendors she had stolen from. Every payment came with a handwritten note apologizing again for the harm she had caused. Most recipients never responded, but a few did, and those connections became the foundation of a new kind of relationship built on honesty rather than exploitation. Her friendship with Thomas Mitchell had become one of the most unexpected and cherished parts of her new life. What had begun as a forced apology had evolved into weekly dinners, long conversations, and a mutual support system that neither had expected to find. Thomas had become a beloved figure at the shelter, his warmth and wisdom drawing residents and volunteers alike. He had started a reading circle for homeless veterans, sharing his love of literature with men and women whose service had led them to circumstances no one should have to endure. The shelter had grown dramatically since Alex's visit, funded by donations that seemed to arrive anonymously, but which everyone suspected came from a certain famous benefactor who preferred to help without recognition. On the anniversary of the night when everything had changed, a small group gathered at the Silver Spoon for a private dinner. Alex Winters sat at table 7, the same spot where Thomas had once proposed to Eleanor, and where he had been denied the chance to honor her memory. Across from him sat Thomas, looking healthier and happier than anyone who knew his history would have thought possible. Beside them were Isabella and Marcus, mother and son, reunited and rebuilding their relationship one honest conversation at a time. Carmen, David, and Rachel had been invited as well. The servers whose tips had been stolen, whose struggles had been made worse by Isabella's crimes. They had all been repaid in full, with interest. But Alex had wanted them to see the larger picture of what their suffering had ultimately produced. "I want to thank each of you," Alex said, raising his glass as the dinner concluded. "Not just for being here tonight, but for proving something I desperately needed to believe." "What's that?" Carmen asked. "That people can change, that circumstances don't have to determine character, that mercy, even when it seems undeserved, can create ripples of healing that extend far beyond any single act of forgiveness." He looked at each face around the table, seeing not the roles they had played in the story, but the human beings they had become through struggle and growth. Thomas, you lost everything and found the strength to keep living. Isabella, you made terrible choices and found the courage to become someone different. Marcus, you fell into darkness and found the determination to climb back toward the light. Carmen, David, Rachel, you were wronged and found the grace to allow the person who wronged you a chance at redemption. Alex's voice grew thick with emotion that he didn't try to hide. I've lost people I loved more than life itself. I know what it feels like to wonder whether anything matters anymore. But nights like this remind me why we keep going. Because every act of kindness, every choice to heal instead of hurt, every moment of genuine human connection adds something to a world that desperately needs more light. He raised his glass higher, to second chances, to unexpected friendships, to the belief that no matter how badly we fall, there's always a path back up. To second chances, everyone echoed, and the words filled the room like a prayer. As the dinner ended and guests began to depart, Thomas lingered at the table, looking out the window at the same view he had hoped to share with Eleanor on that terrible night 6 months ago. You know, he said softly, and Alex stayed to listen, I came to this restaurant planning to end my life. I was going to have one last meal with my wife's memory, and then I was going to find a quiet place to let go. Alex nodded, having suspected as much. What changed your mind? You did, Thomas said, turning to face him with eyes bright with unshed tears. When I was sitting on that bench in the park, broken and humiliated and ready to give up, a stranger sat down beside me. A stranger who saw my pain and thought I was worth helping. A stranger who gave me a card for a shelter and said my story wasn't over yet. Thomas smiled, and in that smile was all the gratitude that words could not adequately express. You were right. My story wasn't over. It was just entering a new chapter. A chapter with characters I never expected and plot twists I never saw coming. A chapter where a woman who hurt me became a friend, and a young man who was lost found his way home, and an old professor who thought he had nothing left to offer discovered he still had gifts to share. He reached out and grasped Alex's hand with a strength that belied his years. Thank you, Thomas said simply. Not just for the shelter or the dinner or any of the material things. Thank you for believing that a broken man was worth saving. That belief saved my life. Alex squeezed his hand in return. You saved yourself, Thomas. I just gave you a reason to try. Tell me in the comments which part of this story moved you most. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. As Alex walked out into the cool night air, he paused on the sidewalk where he had first seen Thomas Mitchell stumble after being thrown from the restaurant. So much had changed since that moment. So much pain had been transformed into purpose. He thought about loved ones he had lost too soon. He thought about all the grief he had carried and all the ways he had learned to transform that grief into action. Some people think money is the answer to everything, Alex said quietly to the stars above. But I've learned that money can only open doors. What matters is what we build once we walk through them. He pulled his hoodie tighter against the evening chill and began walking into the night. Just another figure on the sidewalk, indistinguishable from any other person making their way through a world full of struggle and beauty. Behind him, the silver spoon glowed warmly in the darkness, a beacon of light in a city full of shadows. Inside, the staff was cleaning up after a successful evening, their laughter and conversation drifting through open windows. And somewhere in that restaurant, at table 7 by the window, a small plaque had been installed. It read, "In memory of Eleanor Mitchell, and in honor of everyone who has ever been made to feel less than human. Here, all are welcome. Here, dignity is never denied. Here, every story matters." The plaque had been Alex's idea, but the words had come from Thomas. A gift from someone who understood firsthand what it meant to be seen as worthless and who had discovered, against all odds, that worthiness had nothing to do with wealth or status. Kindness, Thomas had learned, was the only currency that mattered. And thanks to an unexpected encounter with a famous stranger in a worn hoodie and baseball cap, he had the rest of his life to spend it freely.